What happens when your mind gets trapped in endless distractions, scrolling, clicking, chasing that next quick hit of pleasure? This audiobook, Breaking the Dopamine Trap, takes you deep into the life of Daniel, a man who unknowingly fell into this invisible prison. From the very first chapter, you'll step into his world, how he lost control, how he struggled to break free, and how he finally discovered the path to freedom. But this isn't just Daniel's story, it's a mirror for your own life. As you listen, you'll recognize the same traps in your habits, the same battles in your thoughts, and most importantly, the same possibilities for change. Stay with this journey from start to finish, and you won't just understand Daniel's transformation. You'll discover practical insights to reclaim your own focus, discipline, and freedom. Because here's the truth. If Daniel can escape the dopamine trap, so can you. Let's start. Chapter 1. Daniel's Silent Enemy. Daniel wasn't the kind of person you would call lazy. In fact, if you asked his friends, they would describe him as ambitious. He had dreams, big ones. He wanted to build a career, to grow financially independent, to stay healthy, and to live a life that mattered. But there was one problem. No matter how many times he planned his day, no matter how many motivational videos he watched, his actions told a different story. Every morning began the same way. Daniel would wake up, full of determination. He would think, today will be different. Today I'll focus. Today I'll get everything done. But then, almost without thinking, he would reach for his phone. One small notification blinked at him, just a harmless little buzz. And in that single moment, the trap would open. He told himself he would only check for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. But 5 minutes turned into 30. 30 turned into an hour. By the time he finally put his phone down, he wasn't refreshed or motivated. He was drained, distracted, and strangely restless. And the saddest part, this wasn't just one bad day. This was his life, on repeat. Daniel believed he was making choices. He thought he was in control. After all, nobody forced him to pick up his phone. Nobody pushed him to open social media or watch another video. But the reality was far darker. What Daniel didn't realize was that every time he tapped on an app, every time he scrolled down a feed, every time he refreshed his screen to see if there was something new, his brain was being hijacked. The chemical responsible? Dopamine, the brain's reward messenger. Now, dopamine isn't evil. In fact, it's essential for survival. It's what made our ancestors hunt, explore, and create. It gave them the motivation to search for food, to build shelter, and to pursue relationships. But here's the catch. Dopamine doesn't distinguish between what's good for you and what's harmful. It only cares about one thing: reward. The quicker and easier the reward, the stronger the pull. And in today's world, those quick rewards are everywhere. For Daniel, they showed up in the form of instant messages, viral videos, games, junk food, and endless notifications. Each one gave him a small hit of dopamine. Each one told his brain, this feels good, do it again. And so without noticing, Daniel was training himself like a lab rat pressing a lever for sugar. At first, Daniel didn't see the damage. Checking his phone seemed harmless. Watching a funny clip felt like a well-deserved break. But slowly, something started to change. He found it harder to focus on anything for more than a few minutes. Reading a book felt boring. Sitting through a lecture was torture. Even conversations with friends seemed to drag. Unless something gave him instant excitement, his brain refused to stay interested. Daniel was stuck in what psychologists call the dopamine trap, a cycle where the brain craves instant gratification and rejects anything that requires effort or patience. And here's the painful truth. Maybe this sounds familiar to you too. How many times have you opened your phone just to check something, only to lose an entire hour? How often do you struggle to start an important task, even though you know it could change your life. If you felt this, you've already stepped into the same trap that controlled Daniel. And unless you break free, the trap only gets tighter. One of the first signs Daniel noticed was restlessness. Even on days when he had nothing urgent to do, he couldn't sit still. He always needed something, a video, a song, a message to keep him stimulated. But the more he consumed, the less satisfied he felt. A 5-minute video wasn't enough anymore. He needed 20. A quick scroll through one app wasn't enough. He jumped between 3 or 4. His brain, rewired by dopamine, demanded more and more to feel the same pleasure. And this is the cruel irony of dopamine addiction. The more you feed it, the less you enjoy it. It's like drinking salt water to quench your thirst. You consume more, but you only feel emptier. And Daniel felt that emptiness. Late at night, after hours lost to meaningless scrolling, he would lie in bed with a sinking feeling. He knew he had wasted his day. He knew he could have done better. Yet when morning came, the cycle repeated. Maybe you're wondering, why is this happening? Why can't Daniel just stop? And maybe you're asking the same question about yourself. The answer lies deeper than willpower, because what Daniel was facing wasn't just a bad habit, it was brain chemistry. His mind had been rewired to seek cheap rewards, and without realizing it, he had become a slave to his own biology. And here's where it gets even scarier. This isn't just Daniel's story. This is the story of an entire generation. And unless you learn to recognize the trap, you may already be living the same life. But don't worry, because in the next part of this journey, you'll not only understand how the trap works, you'll see exactly how Daniel began to fight his way out, and the lessons he learned could be the very key you've been searching for. Chapter 2: The Hidden Costs. Daniel thought his problem was simple. He just needed more willpower. He believed that if he could force himself to focus, everything would change. But days turned into weeks and the cycle repeated. The more he tried to control his habits, the more he felt controlled by them. At first, it looked like a small issue. A wasted hour here, a late assignment there, nothing too dramatic. But slowly, the hidden costs began to pile up, and they were far more dangerous than he realized. One evening, Daniel sat at his desk, determined to study for an important exam. He opened his notebook, read the first paragraph of his notes, and then, without even realizing it, his hand reached for his phone. He checked one notification, then another. 10 minutes later, he tried to go back to reading, but something felt wrong. The words blurred, his mind wandered. He couldn't sit still. After just 5 minutes of effort, his brain screamed for another distraction. That night, Daniel discovered the first cost of dopamine addiction. Focus was slipping away. You see, focus is like a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it gets. But Daniel had been training his brain in the opposite direction. Every time he gave in to instant gratification, he was teaching his mind to expect quick rewards instead of patient effort. It wasn't that Daniel couldn't focus, it was that his brain had forgotten how to focus. And here's the shocking part. If you find yourself struggling to read a book, sit through a lecture, or work on a project without getting restless, you're experiencing the very same cost Daniel was. For Daniel, pleasure was everywhere. Funny videos, addictive games, fast food, endless entertainment. He always had something to keep him stimulated. But the strange thing was this. The more pleasure he consumed, the less joy he felt. His favorite hobbies no longer excited him, conversations with friends seemed dull, even small achievements felt empty. This is what dopamine addiction does. It replaces deep satisfaction with shallow pleasure. Real happiness comes from growth, progress, and meaningful connections. But those things take time. They require patience, effort, and consistency. Dopamine addiction, on the other hand, teaches the brain to chase quick highs and ignore long-term rewards. Daniel didn't realize it, but he was trading away his future joy for temporary comfort. And maybe you felt the same. Moments where nothing feels enjoyable unless it's fast, flashy, and easy. That's not just boredom, it's a sign that your brain has been rewired. Daniel also noticed a growing uneasiness inside him. Whenever he tried to sit quietly, no phone, no music, no distractions, he felt uncomfortable. His mind would race. He needed something to fill the silence. At first, he thought this was normal, but in truth, it was another hidden cost. His brain had become so addicted to stimulation that silence felt unbearable. This restlessness wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. It left Daniel anxious, always needing something to do, but never able to focus on the things that truly mattered. And here's a question for you. When was the last time you sat alone with your thoughts without reaching for your phone? If the idea itself makes you uneasy, then you've already tasted the same anxiety Daniel was living with every day. Perhaps the greatest cost of all was one Daniel didn't notice right away: time. One afternoon, Daniel sat down for just 5 minutes of gaming. Hours passed, the sun went down, his assignments remained untouched, his goals slipped further away. Day after day, the minutes he wasted added up to hours, the hours to days, and the days into months. At first, he told himself he was still young, that he had plenty of time to figure things out. But late one night, lying in bed, he sometimes wondered, what if I'm wasting the only years I'll ever get? And this is the cruel truth of the dopamine trap. It doesn't just destroy your focus, your joy, or your peace, it steals your life. Daniel's story isn't rare, it's not extreme, in fact, it's ordinary, and that's what makes it terrifying. Because the dopamine trap doesn't destroy your life all at once. It doesn't crash into you like an accident. Instead, it quietly erodes you, piece by piece, until you wake up one day and realize you've lost years chasing empty rewards. The silent thief of dopamine addiction is already in our pockets, on our screens, in our habits. The question isn't whether you've met this thief. The real question is how much it has already stolen from you. And for Daniel, the answer was clear: too much. One night, Daniel sat with a group of friends. They laughed, told stories, and tried to enjoy their time together. But Daniel felt disconnected. He couldn't focus on the conversation. He kept checking his phone under the table, waiting for something more interesting. When he finally looked up, he realized something shocking. His friends were doing the same thing. Everyone at the table was half present, their minds elsewhere, their eyes glued to glowing screens. At that moment, Daniel understood this wasn't just his personal struggle. This was a cultural epidemic. And that was his breaking point. For the first time, he admitted to himself, I am trapped, and if I don't change now, I might never escape. That night, Daniel went home with one burning question. If my brain has been hijacked, how do I take it back? He didn't have the answer yet, but the search for that answer would lead him to a powerful discovery: the truth about how technology and society exploit the dopamine system and what he could do to break free. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Because in the following chapter, you'll see how the modern world was designed to keep Daniel trapped and how the same design is affecting you right now. Once you see it clearly, you'll never look at your phone, your apps, or your habits the same way again. So, stay with me. The most eye-opening part of Daniel's journey is just ahead. Chapter 3: How the World Exploits You. Daniel used to think he was the problem. He thought his lack of focus, his endless scrolling, his constant need for stimulation, all of it was because he was weak, lazy, undisciplined. But one night, sitting in his dimly lit apartment, with his phone glowing in his hand, he stumbled onto a truth that flipped his world upside down. It wasn't just him. The trap he was caught in wasn't an accident. It was designed. Daniel thought he was making choices, choosing to open his phone, choosing to scroll, choosing to click play next episode. But the deeper he looked, the more he realized he hadn't really been choosing at all. The apps chose for him. The algorithms chose for him. His attention wasn't being freely given, it was being taken. Think about it. Why do social media feeds never end? Why does your phone buzz at random times instead of on a schedule? Why does Netflix automatically start the next episode before you can even breathe? These aren't coincidences, they are traps, carefully engineered to keep you hooked. And Daniel was hooked deep. One article Daniel read compared social media to a slot machine. And the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Every time he refreshed his feed, it was like pulling a lever. Would something exciting pop up? A funny meme? A shocking video? A new message? Most of the time, nothing special. But every once in a while, there was a jackpot, a hilarious post, a shocking headline, a friend tagging him. And that occasional reward, that unpredictability, was exactly what kept him coming back. Psychologists call it variable rewards. It's the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. And now, Daniel realized it was built into the phone he carried everywhere. No wonder he couldn't stop. His brain had been wired to crave the next pull of the lever. Daniel began to study more about this. The deeper he went, the angrier he became. He discovered that entire teams of scientists, psychologists, and engineers were working together, not to help people, but to trap them, to hijack the brain's reward system, to squeeze every last second of attention out of every single person. The red notification bubbles weren't random. Red is a color that signals urgency. It makes the brain jump. That buzz in his pocket, it wasn't just a sound. It was a carefully tuned trigger designed to spike dopamine. Daniel realized he wasn't failing because he lacked willpower. He was failing because the game was rigged. And the house always wins. At first, Daniel thought the only cost was time wasted. Hours scrolling, hours watching, hours clicking. But then he realized something scarier. It wasn't just time. It was focus. It was discipline. It was potential. Every time he gave in to a notification, his ability to focus on real work got weaker. Every time he binged on instant entertainment, his tolerance for patience shrank. Every time he reached for the easy hit of dopamine, the harder but more meaningful tasks, studying, creating, building, felt impossible. He wasn't just wasting time, he was wasting himself. And he wasn't alone. Look around. How many people do you see glued to their screens? On buses, in restaurants, even in bed. Heads bent, eyes locked, thumbs scrolling. It's not just Daniel, it's an entire generation caught in the same trap. Daniel started to see the bigger picture. The apps weren't free, the shows weren't free, the games weren't free. If he wasn't paying with money, what was he paying with? His attention, his data, his behavior. He was the product. Every second he stayed online made someone else richer. His distractions weren't random, they were profitable. And suddenly, Daniel understood why it felt impossible to quit. It wasn't because he was weak, it was because the system was designed to keep him weak. One evening, Daniel sat staring at his phone, scrolling through videos he didn't even care about. Minutes turned to hours. His to-do list sat untouched, his work remained unfinished, his body slouched, his eyes heavy. And then it hit him. This isn't me choosing. This thing owns me. The phone in his hand, once a tool, had become a leash. For years, he had believed the lie, that he was simply lazy, that he lacked discipline. But now he saw the truth. His environment was built to exploit him. His brain chemistry was being hijacked. His choices weren't truly his own. And that truth, as painful as it was, gave him a strange kind of power. Because if the trap was designed, then maybe, just maybe, there was also a way out. And this, my friend, is where Daniel's story collides with yours. Because maybe you felt it too. Maybe you've opened your phone for just 5 minutes and lost an entire hour. Maybe you've promised yourself just one episode and suddenly it's 3 a.m. You've felt the same leash, haven't you? The question is, will you keep pretending you're in control, or will you admit that the system has been controlling you all along? Daniel chose to face that reality, and that choice set him on a path that would change everything. But facing the truth is only the first step. The real battle begins when you try to take your control back. And that's exactly what Daniel did next. Chapter 4: The Detox. Daniel woke up one morning with an unusual heaviness in his chest. It wasn't just exhaustion from another night of endless scrolling, it was something deeper. A quiet voice inside whispered that if he didn't change now, he might never escape. He had already lost years of his life to distraction, and if he continued, the years ahead would slip away too. That day, he made a decision. He didn't know exactly how, but he was going to break free. He started with a simple but terrifying idea. What if he stopped feeding his brain the constant hits of dopamine? What if he removed the endless stimulation and forced himself to live without it? The thought alone made him uneasy. He had grown used to the comfort of instant pleasure, the glow of his phone, the quick escape of a video, the thrill of notifications. To take that away felt like cutting off air. But deep down, he knew it was the only way. So Daniel began what he would later call his detox. The first step was brutal. He turned off every notification on his phone. No pings, no buzzes, no flashing lights. Silence. At first, it felt unnatural, like the world had gone quiet. His hand kept reaching for his phone out of habit, expecting something new to appear, but nothing did. The second step was harder. He deleted the apps that consumed him the most: social media, streaming platforms, games. Each deletion felt like ripping away a piece of comfort, a small death of the world he had built around distraction. But at the same time, with each tap of delete, he felt a little lighter, a little freer. That night was the worst. He lay in bed, restless, his mind screaming for stimulation. His hand itched to grab the phone and reinstall everything he had deleted. His brain begged for just one video, just one scroll, just one distraction. He tossed and turned, sweating under the weight of withdrawal. Because that's what it was. Withdrawal. Most people think addiction only comes from drugs or alcohol, but Daniel now knew better. Addiction is anything that takes control of you, anything you can't live without. And for him, his addiction was the constant flood of digital dopamine. The second day was no easier. Time moved painfully slow. Tasks that should have taken minutes dragged on for hours because he couldn't focus. Without constant entertainment, silence became unbearable. His thoughts felt louder than ever, circling around mistakes, regrets, fears. He realized that much of his scrolling had never been about fun. It had been about running away from his own mind. But slowly, something began to shift. On the third day, Daniel noticed the sun pouring through his window in a way he hadn't in years. He noticed the sound of birds outside, the rhythm of his own breathing. He went for a walk without headphones, and for the first time in a long time, he actually saw his neighborhood instead of just passing through it. The cravings didn't disappear overnight, but with every hour he resisted, his mind felt a little clearer. The fog began to lift, his energy slowly returned. It was as if layers of noise were peeling away, revealing a quieter, calmer world underneath. One evening, sitting alone with a notebook, Daniel wrote something that would stay with him forever. "My mind is a garden. For years, I've let weeds grow wild, feeding them with endless distraction. But if I stop feeding them, maybe the flowers will finally have space to grow." The days turned into weeks, and each day of detox was a battle. Sometimes he lost, falling back into old habits, sneaking back to the digital slot machine for a quick fix. But instead of drowning in guilt, he learned to reset, to begin again the next morning. And slowly, he discovered something extraordinary. He didn't need constant stimulation anymore.
He could sit with silence and not panic. He could work for longer stretches without checking his phone. He could enjoy a meal without needing a screen in front of him. What once felt impossible was becoming normal. But the most powerful change wasn't in his habits, it was in his sense of control. For the first time in years, he felt like he was making choices again, real choices. Not the kind dictated by algorithms, not the kind manipulated by flashing notifications, but choices born from his own will. And as he regained that control, he started to notice opportunities he had been blind to before. A book that had been gathering dust on his shelf suddenly called to him, and he read it cover to cover. Ideas he had buried under distractions began to resurface. Dreams of starting projects, of building something meaningful, of living with purpose instead of passively consuming. Daniel realized that detox wasn't just about removing distractions. It was about rediscovering himself. And this is where his story once again meets yours. Because you may already feel that same pull, that same craving for constant stimulation. You may have told yourself that you're in control, that you can quit anytime. But the truth is, the real test is whether you can sit in silence, whether you can face the discomfort of boredom without running to the easy fix. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you spent an entire hour without checking your phone? When was the last time you let your mind wander freely without filling it with endless noise? Daniel's detox was not perfect. He failed often, but he kept fighting, and every time he resisted, his strength grew. Every time he reclaimed a piece of his attention, his life expanded. And here's the secret he discovered. The detox isn't about punishment. It isn't about depriving yourself. It's about freedom. Freedom from the leash, freedom from the trap, freedom to live on your own terms again. One evening, weeks into his detox, Daniel sat by his window as the sun set. He wasn't scrolling, he wasn't watching, he was simply there, breathing, watching the sky fade into orange and pink, and in that moment he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. The detox was only the beginning, but it was the doorway to a life he thought he had lost. And soon Daniel would realize that the true challenge wasn't just removing distractions. It was learning how to build a new life around focus, meaning, and purpose. That was the path ahead, and it would demand more from him than he ever expected.
Chapter 5: Rewiring Your Brain for Deep Focus. Daniel's detox had given him a new kind of clarity. But clarity alone was not enough. He quickly realized that while he had cut away the distractions, he had not yet filled the empty space they left behind. Silence was a relief at first, but silence without direction soon became a danger. Without purpose, the temptation to drift back into old habits would always remain. He needed more than freedom from the trap. He needed a reason to stay out of it. It began one morning when Daniel woke before dawn. He had been waking earlier since the detox, his body no longer dulled by late-night binges of videos and endless scrolling. He stepped outside, the air crisp and cool, and watched as the horizon shifted from darkness to gold. For the first time in years, he wasn't rushing anywhere, wasn't lost in a feed, wasn't numbing himself. He was simply present. And then a thought struck him. What if he could build his life around moments like this? What if he could create a structure that protected him from slipping back into the old cycle? That morning, Daniel made his first attempt at building a new routine. He started small, writing down 3 things he wanted to do each day: read for 30 minutes, exercise, and write in his journal. He told himself it didn't matter how much progress he made, only that he showed up. The first day, it was awkward. He read, but his mind wandered. He exercised, but only for 10 minutes before collapsing in frustration. He journaled, but most of what he wrote felt meaningless. Still, he did it. The next day, he did it again, and the next. The tasks were simple, even boring at times, but something powerful was happening. Slowly, the empty hours that once swallowed him with distractions were being filled with effort, growth, and consistency. But it wasn't smooth. On the fourth day, he woke up tired and nearly skipped. His mind screamed excuses. Just today. You've earned a break. What's the harm? It was the same voice that had always pulled him back into the trap before. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, torn, and then he remembered the nights of restlessness during his detox, the endless cravings, the suffocating fog that came from living under the rule of distraction. He asked himself, do I really want to go back there? The answer was no. So he forced himself to stand up, to pick up the book, to move his body, to write a single line in his journal. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And that day, he discovered a truth that would guide him for the rest of his life. Consistency mattered more than intensity. It wasn't about doing it all at once. It was about showing up even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was small. Weeks passed, and Daniel's routine began to reshape him. The morning walks became a ritual. The journaling revealed patterns in his thoughts he had never noticed before. Reading sparked new ideas, reminding him of the hunger for knowledge he once had as a child. Slowly, he began to feel alive again. And yet, as progress came, so did resistance. There were days when his old cravings roared back, louder than ever. Nights when he stared at his phone, finger hovering over the App Store, desperate for just one taste of the old world. He was tempted, deeply tempted. But every time he remembered the fog that he had escaped, the cage he had broken, and he put the phone back down. But temptation wasn't the only obstacle. Loneliness crept in too. Without the noise of social media, without the constant chatter of online feeds, Daniel felt the emptiness of people. It wasn't that he lacked friends, but he realized how shallow many of his connections had been, built on likes, comments, and fleeting exchanges rather than real bonds. It hurt to admit that much of what he once called socializing had been nothing more than consuming together, watching the same meaningless content and pretending it was connection. Now, with the noise stripped away, he saw the emptiness. But rather than run from it, he chose to face it. He reached out to one old friend, someone he had lost touch with years ago. They met for coffee, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel gave someone his full attention. No phone on the table, no distractions, just conversation. It was awkward at first, but as the minutes passed, something real emerged. Connection, presence, humanity. That evening, walking home, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. He realized that connection didn't come from being constantly plugged into a network. It came from depth, from time, from presence. He didn't need hundreds of friends online. He needed a few people he could truly show up for. As the weeks unfolded, Daniel's routine evolved into something deeper. He wasn't just avoiding distractions anymore. He was building a life worth staying focused on. A life filled with learning, with growth, with relationships that mattered. But even as things improved, he knew he couldn't let his guard down. The trap was still out there, waiting, disguised as convenience, disguised as harmless entertainment. He had escaped once, but escape was only the beginning. And that's where you come into his story. Because maybe you've tried detoxes before. Maybe you've taken breaks. Maybe you've sworn you'd cut down. But the real challenge isn't just cutting away what harms you. It's replacing it with something better, something that pulls you forward instead of dragging you down. Daniel's story shows that freedom is possible, but it isn't free. It demands effort, sacrifice, and above all, consistency. Ask yourself, what would your life look like if you replaced even 1 hour a day of distraction with something meaningful? What could you build? What could you learn? Who could you become? For Daniel, the answer was becoming clear. He was not just surviving without distraction anymore, he was beginning to thrive. His detox had opened the door, but his routine was what kept him walking forward. And soon, he would face the greatest test of all. Not just resisting the trap,
but learning how to transform his newfound clarity into a purpose that would carry him for the rest of his life. Because escaping is one thing, but building something worth staying free for, that is where the true journey begins.
Chapter 6. A Life Beyond the Trap. Daniel's routine was no longer a fragile experiment. It had become the backbone of his days. But as he grew stronger, he began to feel the stirrings of a deeper question. Routines gave him structure, yes, but structure without direction could become another cage. He didn't just want discipline, he wanted purpose. He wanted to know why he was doing all of this. One night, as he lay in bed after journaling, a thought wouldn't leave him alone. What am I really moving toward? It was the same restlessness that had once driven him into distractions, but now it pointed somewhere else. He realized that, while distractions had numbed him, they had also kept him from confronting the emptiness underneath. Now, stripped of those numbing tools, he had no choice but to face it. For days, the question gnawed at him. He kept his routine, but something was missing. He could feel it in the silence of his walks, in the pages of the books he read, in the words he scribbled into his journal. It was as if life was asking him, "What is all this for?" One morning, frustrated, Daniel went for a longer walk than usual. He wandered without a plan, ending up at a small park on the edge of the city. Children were playing, their laughter ringing in the air. Parents watched from benches, some chatting, others lost in thought. As Daniel sat on a bench, he noticed an elderly man nearby, sketching quietly in a notebook. The man's movements were slow, but deliberate, each line drawn with care. Curiosity pulled Daniel closer, and soon they began to talk. The man told him he had been drawing for over 50 years, not for fame, not for money, but because it brought him peace. Something about that struck Daniel deeply. Here was someone who had built his life around a quiet pursuit, not because the world demanded it, but because it made his days meaningful. As they parted ways, Daniel couldn't stop thinking. Maybe purpose didn't have to be grand or world-changing. Maybe it was about finding something worth showing up for every single day. That night, he sat with his journal and wrote down a single question. What makes me feel alive? At first, the page stayed blank, but slowly, memories surfaced. How he used to love writing stories as a child. How he felt when he lost himself in creating something. How alive he felt when sharing an idea that sparked someone else's imagination. It was a fragile realization, but it felt real. He wanted to create again. Not to prove himself, not to gain approval, but to reconnect with the part of him he had abandoned. So the next morning, Daniel added a new task to his routine. Create something every day. It didn't matter what, an essay, a sketch, a paragraph in a story. What mattered was the act of creating. At first, it was clumsy. His words felt forced, his ideas shallow. Doubt whispered, "You're wasting your time. You're not good enough. Why bother?" But he kept going, one line at a time. Then, something strange happened. The more he created, the more he saw how the distractions had stolen this from him. All those hours he once gave away to scrolling, to passive consumption, could have been hours of building, of discovering, of expressing. The realization cut deep. He wasn't just angry at the trap anymore, he was angry at himself for staying in it for so long. But that anger became fuel. Every page he filled, every thought he captured was proof that he was reclaiming his life. As weeks turned to months, Daniel's creations grew. Some were small and private, others he shared with close friends. Slowly he noticed something extraordinary. People began to respond. A friend told him that something he had written helped them see their own life differently. Another asked him to share more. And for the first time, Daniel saw the ripple effect of purpose. His journey wasn't just healing him, it was touching others. And in that moment, he understood something vital. True purpose doesn't just serve you, it serves others too. But purpose wasn't just about creating. It was about the way he lived every day. He started asking himself a new question. Does this align with the life I want to build? Whenever temptation returned, when he felt the urge to reinstall an app, to drown in noise again, he asked that question. And the answer was always clear: no. Distractions no longer looked harmless. They looked like thieves, ready to steal the only thing he couldn't replace: time. One evening as he walked home, he noticed the city lights flickering on one by one. For years he had seen these same streets through a haze, always rushing, always distracted. Now, every detail felt sharper. The sound of footsteps, the rustle of trees, the hum of distant traffic. Life had texture again. It was then he realized clarity itself was a kind of purpose. To live awake, not numbed. To live present, not lost. And as his story unfolded, you could almost feel it reaching out of his world into yours. Because maybe you've asked yourself the same questions. Maybe you felt the hollowness that comes from endless distraction. Maybe you've wondered, what is all this for? Daniel's answer wasn't final. It was still forming. But that was the beauty of it. Purpose wasn't a destination you reached once and for all. It was a path, one you committed to walking every day. The more he walked, the more he discovered that the trap he had escaped wasn't just digital, it was deeper. It was the trap of living without asking why. And now, finally, he was free enough to ask. By the end of that year, Daniel looked back and hardly recognized the man he had been. Not because he had become someone else, but because he had uncovered the person he was always meant to be, the one hidden beneath layers of distraction. And for the first time in years, he could see ahead, not just day by day, but toward a future that felt worth building. Because escaping the trap had given him freedom, but finding his purpose, that was giving him life.
Conclusion. Daniel's story is not just his own. It's a mirror. At one time, he was trapped by invisible chains, thinking he was in control while dopamine quietly pulled the strings. But slowly, he chose awareness over autopilot, intention over impulse, and growth over comfort. And here's the truth, you and I are no different. We all carry those same temptations in our pockets, on our screens, in our routines. But like Daniel, we also carry the power to break free. The dopamine trap loses its strength the moment you see it for what it really is. The choice is always there, to scroll or to create, to numb yourself or to grow, to waste time or to live it fully. No one else can make that choice for you. So as this journey closes, ask yourself, what will I do with the hours, the days, the years ahead of me? Daniel found freedom not because he was stronger than anyone else, but because he started small, stayed consistent, and refused to give up. And if he could do it, so can you. Your story is still being written, and starting today, you get to decide whether it will be written inside the trap or beyond it.